Hello, we are here with Nick Hudson from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you to come here from the other side of the world. And could you explain what did you say and what is your position about all the pandemic we just see in last years?
Sure. Yes, I'm Nick Hudson. I'm a chairman of an organization called PANDA.org, if you want to find our website. We started as an organization in response to the initial lockdowns as they rippled around the planet. And our position was very much that no cost-benefit analysis had been performed before these very harmful policies were rolled out in lockstep in every country in the Western world. And our organization grew very rapidly as we began to connect with people in other countries. And we became one of the first organizations to study the international data showing that lockdowns were not having the benefit that the modelers had expected. And from there our work went on to cover all aspects of the COVID policy response. Our view is that it is best understood as a political phenomenon and not a medical phenomenon. This is a realization that I think people are gradually coming around to as they realize that the harms that were caused by the policy response massively exceed the harms that the virus ever had the potential to cause. The substantive reality is that COVID as an entity, it represents absolutely minimal risk to the vast majority of people on the planet. And therefore, a response which took into account the totality of the world, shutting down everything and closing schools and so on, was inappropriate at the level of a utilitarian analysis. But more importantly, all those responses were in principle wrong. They were ethically wrong as well. And our view is that it is important now for us to stop obsessing over the minutiae of the COVID mortality and the early treatment and the vaccine harms and so on, and to step back and see this event in its full political context, because that political context is suggestive of a time of great danger for humanity and for the very important principle that was the very founding concept of the West and of Europe that we know today, that principle of the protection of human agency and of mitigation of power, of how we prevent authoritarian control from governing our societies and permit a flourishing world, a flourishing society, a society where there is a diversity of ideas and opinions. All of that is at risk at the moment, and the COVID phenomenon, the COVID policy response, is but one example of many that warn us that we are heading in the wrong direction.
Okay, so you are seeing also the pandemic crisis as also a tool for some political views, right?
Yes.
Could you make a parallel with the climate discussion about the climate fear that was existing before and still existing now, and it seems to be stronger and stronger. What do you think? Do you think there is a parallel because between both COVID and climate?
Yes, let's take a step back. The general rule of thumb that I believe everybody should adopt is that if any problem is being presented as a global crisis, then it is a scam. And the pattern that we are confronted with is really the fabrication of global crises. The presentation either of non-existent problems or small local problems as being general global crises. That fabrication followed by the assertion that the only solutions that are permissible are global ones that require a global authority, global control. That is the general pattern that we are up against. The COVID policy response was one of those. Look at what happened to countries like Sweden or Tanzania, who tried to push back against the orthodoxy, the new orthodoxy. And the climate crisis, the climate change crisis, is another example where we are told that the biggest threat to the world is this molecule, CO2, and that an increase in the level of this molecule will cause an increase in temperature, and that temperature increase will be bad for us, and that the only thing we can do is consume fewer fossil fuels and less energy. That's fitting the pattern exactly. The other things you can observe is, instead of presenting science as an ongoing, evolving activity, it is presented in terms of static knowledge, consensus. And you see the cancellation and censorship of dissident voices rather than engagement with them. These patterns are proof of a scam. That is what people need to understand. Whenever something is presented as the science, as a consensus, it is a scam. You do not have to go and get engaged in all of the minutiae of the scientific principles and the models and the measurements at all. You can know with absolute certainty that you are dealing with a scam when dissent is suppressed.
Yeah. But I think that people think that scientific consensus is scientific processes. This is not the same thing.
It's absolutely not the same thing. Science works by on the principle that all explanations that we have for how the world works will eventually be replaced with better ones. And that process happens in an evolutionary way in the world of competing ideas. As explanations are tested and found to embed errors, found to represent reality in a way that is wrong, in other words, they are falsified, what happens is there's a creative process in the sciences when new ideas, new explanations, altered explanations step in to fill the gap left by the ones that have been falsified. And that evolutionary process is fundamental to science and is completely contradicted by the very notion of consensus science or following the science.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you will stay here in Brussels to discover the beautiful weather. And thank you to answer our question.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's really good.